Hi everyone. Hello. Thank you all so much for coming for our first lecture series of the year. So it is my pleasure to introduce Evan. Evan is a multidisciplinary artist and designer based in New York City with a diverse background spanning in animation, interactive design, and game development. Evan has worked with over 20 renowned studios including Be Real, Hush, and Google Creative Labs. He created his first animation and code on a TI-83 graphing calculator, beginning a lifelong journey of exploring new media. In 2016, he co-founded the acclaimed game studio Feral Cat. Their debut title, Genesis Noir, was featured in 30 Games of the Year lists and earned a BAFTA Award nomination. Currently, Evan is spearheading the development of Nirvana Noir and continues to push the boundaries of interactive storytelling. So without further ado, please give a round of applause for our first lecturer, Evan Anthony.
Well, hello everyone, thank you so much. I'm really so honored to be here to present my work to you and share the reflections I've had over the past 15 years of my career. I'm going to be mostly talking about our first video game, Genesis Noir. And to introduce this talk, I want to begin with a montage from this game. The level that I'm about to show you is called Reflections, and it depicts the main character, No Man, confronting a narcissistic God, and in doing so, creating life on Earth. This level portrays abiogenesis, which is the process in which matter became organic, formed structures like lipid bilayers, and evolved through reproduction to form life. And this level is a great introduction to the kind of storytelling and tactile interactions that interest me and the team at Feral Cat. And now that some time has passed, I find that this level actually really illustrates what the creative process of what making Genesis Noir was like. The mystery of how life emerged from a sea of simple bits and pieces really reminds me of how our project came together. The level ends with this scene. No Man's been poking at these organisms, and he hasn't yet noticed that this complex ecosystem has emerged around him. And game development often feels like this, obsessing about some specific problem, and all the while the story and the project is coming together without your conscious knowledge. Also, I'm pretty sure my posture is just like this all the time when I'm working. I'm like hunched over, typing, or in betweening some animation, or like trying to figure out like what this is, like, or all our crazy shaders. And in this talk, I want to explain why it's worth going through a lot of pain in the creative process to make something. I believe that, as the psychologist Abraham Maslow wrote, a job entered into for the sake of earning a living can be loved for its own sake. Even the dullest, dreariest job, as long as it is worthwhile in principle, can be sanctified, sacralized, ontified, changed from a mere means into an end, value in itself. As I continue to design, animate, and hone my craft, I find I discover more and more reasons to keep at it. Like, there's just so many reasons to make art. Like, lots of mundane reasons, like paying the bills or getting money to buy dumplings. But less mundane reasons, like joining a community and meeting beautiful people and attending conferences and motivations like becoming the universe, which is maybe a little bit of an ambitious idea. I can talk about becoming a Frog Eye indie game developer unmoored from time and space. So I'll be going through my personal experience in my early years, starting our studio Feral Cat Den, deciding to make our first indie game, Genesis Noir, and the highs and lows of that process, what it was like to release it, and what I've been doing since, and how creating that game has shattered my ego and crystallized in my heart a nugget of pure eagerness to make cool art. So, beginning with my early years, my first animation and programming was done on a TI 3 Plus graphing calculator in high school math class. So lots of very immature animations, as you can imagine. I went on to study new media design at RIT, and I realized that designers were my kind of people. I'd buy packs of playing cards and give them out to my classmates and strangers, and I was just always so floored by the interesting designs that I would get, or people sanding cards or burning them, just so many creative things. At school, we were assigned web design and motion graphics projects, and we were given a lot of creative independence. And I really enjoyed pushing myself to pick up a new tool, or a new visual style, or a new subject matter. Although I really struggled when my classmates made me put on a play. Here you can see me and my co-founder, Jeremy Abel. Jeremy Abel is performing as a transparent amoeba, and I think this like completely foreshadows our experience debugging our video game. And Jeremy would always have these amazing projects, and we had so much respect for one another. I particularly like this project where he composed music, did stop motion, and composited visual effects, all in like a couple weeks. It was such a fun period in our life. And after school, we both moved to New York City and worked at so many fantastic studios, occasionally overlapping. I created animation and motion graphics at studios like Dress Code. I created installations at Hush and Red Paper Heart. I did UI design and products at Google and Hello Monday. And in my spare time, I was always making my own little projects too. For instance, I made this little short about how our DNA can be compressed from 725 megabytes all the way down to 4 megabytes. Or I would always like making buttons, and I turned them into a music video with 300 handmade buttons. And I would also try to get away from the computer now and then and make something crafty with my hands, usually as a gift for people, and force them to accept little push puppets or decoder rings. And Jeremy and I continued to collaborate after school. So we would always, on a weekend, decide to go to a fabric shop and try to make some fire out of fabric or birch logs. Our most ambitious project was making a pixel art game of our friends. And this gave Jeremy and I a good taste of what it's like to make a bit of gameplay and storytelling and packaging. We really liked it. During this period in my career, I was really motivated by developing my craft and participating in a community. I really adored meeting new creative people at all the various studios I had the opportunity to work at, and forcing people to accept my weird little gifts. But Jeremy and I, we were both sad that a lot of the times projects we worked on would have very short lifespans. An installation we made might just be up for a couple of days, and then it disappeared. Or a website would be up for maybe a month or two, and then it gets taken down. And we understand that's business, these things have a function. But we still wanted to make something long form that would last a little longer. So I started dreaming of a barn, a place filled with feral cats that was very cheap and affordable, that I could convince my friends to join me in and make art or start a business. And I kept on telling this to my friends, and my buddy just took that name literally, Feral Cat Den, and started referring to this fantasy as Feral Cat Den, and I really hated it. I wanted to sit down with a pen and paper and do some brainstorming. What could our little studio or collective or whatever be called? But the name stuck, and now I kind of like it. I like that the name chose us. So in 2016, Jeremy and I formed an LLC and made it official. We started in a very gross, dingy little shared studio space, but we eventually upgraded to our current space, which this is our current space. It's much nicer. Still tiny, but much nicer. We began our first indie game, Genesis Noir, with Jeremy leading the tech. I led the creative, and we managed to convince the incredibly talented music and sound design team, Skillbard, to join us on fleshing this world out. We also worked with so many of our freelance friends, remote artists, developers, publishers, instrumentalists, localizers. Just so many people ended up contributing to this project by the end of it that, oh my God, I couldn't have imagined that would require this many talented people. And it was so beautiful to see it all come together. So now to show you a bit about where all those talents went and what we worked on. So Genesis Noir is an adventure game set before, during, and after the Big Bang. To save a god, you must stop the expansion of the universe. To give you a better idea of what that means, let's watch the release trailer. Genesis Noir's story was inspired by Cosmic Comics by Italo Calvino. What makes this collection of short stories so special to me is that Calvino tells delightfully humanistic stories in a cosmic setting. He begins each story with a scientific concept, usually just a single paragraph. And he uses this as a springboard for his imagination, rather than trying to portray the nitty-gritty details of that scientific theory. And this balance between fiction and nonfiction really appeals to me. And it got me thinking of what other stories could be told with this framework. While I was walking across the Williamsburg Bridge in New York and admiring the skyline, I realized that The Big Bang sounded just like a film noir title. And I thought that adding some pulpy urban flavors and a bit of genre could be a way for us to tell a story that was influenced by cosmic comics and pay homage to that work, but make something a little bit new. And this idea also was the perfect balance between my interests and those of Jeremy. I proposed the concept to him, and he was immediately on board. In addition to Calvino, I was really inspired by the woozy Afrofuturistic jazz of Sun Ra, the transitions in art direction of motion graphic studios like Buck and Golden Wolf, the minimalistic science fiction of Alphaville, the visionary art of William Blake, and comic storytelling like you might find in Gloriana. So beginning this project really revealed the endless possibilities of creativity, and I was discovering how much fun it was to dive deeply into research and to develop our own independent voices and start a business. I gobbled up dozens of books on popular science, on art theory, and some of my favorite, collecting references and reading biographies on artists I admired to feed this project. In particular, I was really inspired by William Blake, the Romantic poet and engraver. Blake created cosmic and spiritual work that I find exceptionally beautiful, and it was also the way that he created that I find particularly inspiring. Blake was basically an early DIY indie artist. He was a talented commercial engraver and printer, but he focused on his personal work. And now he did die poor and underappreciated, so maybe not the best role model when you're using your life savings on an indie game, but regardless, I snuck a bunch of references to Blake's images into Genesis Noir, like this scene from Reflections, the Reflections level that I showed you. The painting on the left here is of Isaac Newton, outlining his laws of motion on the bottom of the ocean. And Blake portrays Newton as this angelic figure, like naked and just jacked, and but one who's cut himself off from the beauty of the natural world. He's down in this dark abyss. And Blake was really wary of the ideas of determinism, materialism, and a clockwork universe. All ideas that I think are very deeply parts of the film noir tradition, and ideas that we wanted to explore in Genesis Noir. So whenever in my research I would find an image like this and find how it could connect to the story and setting that I was creating with Genesis Noir, it was just so exhilarating. Jeremy and I began sketching on big newsprint, and we came up with a classic love triangle between three cosmic beings who each embody a universal constant. Nomad, our protagonist, is the manifestation of time. He's the archetypal noir protagonist who's haunted by his past, and he's staring down a future of failure, so he drinks to live in the moment. Miss Mass is a Kirby jazz singer who is the embodiment of gravity, and she's very attractive in a literal sense and falls victim to the Big Bang. And Golden Boy is our antagonist, who's a big narcissist, and he's the creator of the golden ratio. We concepted how a gunshot could contain our universe and sketched out a cosmic city where that gunshot could be fired. We thought about the rules and world building of this space. We roughed in a basic 3-act story structure that creates a foundation in familiar noir tropes and storytelling before we get too cosmic and weird, like introducing a multicolored being called Siren Sapien, who's the collective spirit of all of humanity. To test our motion graphic style design, I began creating these pre-visualization animations in Cinema 4D. And Jeremy and I took some time off from our freelancing jobs to try to create some prototypes and experiment in Unity. How does it feel to walk around these abstract environments? Is it clear what you can interact with? And how difficult was it to produce these transitions in a gameplay environment? We posted these tests online and we got a lot of positive feedback. So we decided we'd continue and work on the game full time. We created a vertical slice, which, if you're unfamiliar with this term, a vertical slice is like a slice of cake. You get a taste of each layer. So the goal is to create a 15 to 30 minute section of the game that includes each system and each piece of the game to give you a feeling of what the whole experience would be like. And this caught the eye of an indie game publisher called Fellow Traveler. And together we decided to run a Kickstarter. And the goal here was not only to get some funding, but also to help us scope out the game and get additional feedback and see what resonated with people. And people warned us that a Kickstarter was hard, but no, like staring at our a funding graph, just like kind of like flagging out like this, it was just really painful. And the Kickstarter campaign was so stressful because there's just like an endless amount of things that you could do, of like more social media posts, more art, more messaging people, more writing onto press. Just an endless amount of things, and like on top of that, my eye turned into a frog's eye. And yeah, I'm not like, not literally frog's eye, but my iris turned into like that kind of elliptical froggy shape. And it got better, so don't worry. But the doctors didn't know why that happened, but I kind of suspect stress maybe was involved. So yeah, even though I had a frog's eye, we made it. Things worked out. But as you can see, like this is a very common pattern in Kickstarters. Most of the time you're like, this isn't going to work, and then at the end you're like, oh my God, we're going to the moon, and then yeah, it was good. So I'm so glad that we did this, because this really taught us how challenging it is to put something out in the world and try to do PR and sell a thing and get people excited and emotionally ride the hits and spurts of funding. Jeremy and I had never started a business or done anything like this, so having an experience like this was so valuable. And because we were successful, we felt confident that we could go for our full scope and vision. We had concepted a bunch of scenes throughout the history of the Big Bang and human civilization that we thought would be fun to create. Scenes like feeding a black hole, or tracking a stag with hunter-gatherers, performing Japanese kintsugi. But we had no idea how any of these ideas actually fit together, or how to make a game, or tell a story that escalated a central plot. We had no idea what we were doing. And we never were able to answer all these questions, but by making something imperfect and sharing it with people and going through the iterative process of feedback and letting the project emerge, we found ourselves really moving in the right direction. One of the best examples of this is our improvisation level, where no man discovers jazz music and learns to bust with this upright bass player. We knew any good noir story had to have jazz, and we loved the graphic design of the album covers of this era. Just perfectly fits with the limitations of being an indie game artist. Just if you can make some cubes look good, then that's like our budget and scope. So we began exploring ideas in different mediums. We wrote a short story, we created intricate storyboards, we created gameplay prototypes, and not just Jeremy and myself, but also our other collaborators were helping us with this. So here's a little capture of what this sequence looks like. Yeah, so this level's interesting to me because the final product combined so many different pieces from the team. And we didn't have a specific vision of what this interaction or story would be, but instead we improvised. And the story of this sequence also tells a story of improvisation. So leading up to this musical brush interaction, we have a simple Simon Says interaction, where no man's learning to collaborate and do a call and response with the other musician. So we tried out a bunch of really complicated things, but in the end we found really simple modulations, where if we could record the player's input and then just double the notes and have the musician play that back to them, it really created this feeling that the game was listening to you and the musician was playing with you. And the game climaxes in this musical brush interaction, where the position of your cursor changes the pitch of the music, and we record the position of that line over time, and then we replay segments of that drawing from the bassist point of view. So you make a sound, and then the musician responds, and it feels like this collaborative experience. And Jeremy made these diagrams for a technical talk about how we built that, but when I look at these illustrations, I really see the creative process. Like when I see this, I see the idea of the project moving through time. It's not a straight line, it goes all over the place. And this drawing that Jeremy made of how that we take the player's input and offset it really felt like how each of our explorations, none of them were exactly aligned with one another, but they all came together to discover this path through. And by adding ideas and often misunderstanding the intent of each other, we found ourselves solving problems and ending up in new and interesting places. And this process of improvising is really how the game emerged from like this pile of ideas that we had. We didn't know how the plot or characters would develop, but by pulling on each one of these loose threads, we found that details were starting to come together. And eventually they formed a tight conceptual knot. And at no point did we feel like we had the answers to any of these big questions, but the process, it did. And waiting for the game to emerge took a long time. But watching it grow in this way was really rewarding. And unfortunately, I didn't always understand this. A few years before working on Genesis Noir, I had been commissioned to make a set of collectible gifts. And I made a story about a wizard who stops time to finish his work. And this is a fantasy that I'd have in school. Like I'd get a prompt, and I'd have a deadline, and I'd be so ambitious, and I'd have so many ideas, and have no way to execute that in the amount of time that I had. And I just wanted to be able to freeze everything, sit down, and just do it. But making Genesis Noir required me to slow down. And I had to realize that the best ideas bubble up when they're ready. You can't just force it. I had to realize that the way to success lies in the way of the universe, which brings about all phenomena in time. Time is no longer a hindrance, but the means of making actual what is potential. Maybe this is obvious to you, but I had to learn this the hard way. And now I do love that time is a vital part of the creative process. It's not something to be agonized or fought. But this love for the process was really balanced by fighting enormous technical and design challenges. I always thought that one of the best aspects about being a designer is that you learn to accept critique, and then you learn that communicating even a simple idea is surprisingly very difficult. Like two people can look at the same logo and get totally different feelings. This Pepsi logo, I'm sure it had a very healthy budget. I'm sure it went through so many very talented people and so many layers of feedback. But still, at the end of the day, they rebranded, and people saw immediately a beer belly or a butt crack. And maybe not the best idea for a soda. And it's just so hard to do the simplest thing. And when you add in animation and story and interaction and everything involved in making a piece of multimedia, the surface area for failure it balloons. And this is a little medley of the bugs that we encountered in the game. But trust me, this is a very small fraction of them. And I remember each and every one. Even once we got a sequence working, we returned to it, maybe 6 months down the line to add a bit of new audio or polish, or even just to test it and find that things were broken. It's so easy to break things. And playtesting this game was a very linear experience. This isn't a game where you get good. It's a game where you run to the right and experience things, and the joy is discovery and surprise. And it's not joyful and surprising when you run through it 1,000 times and each time something breaks in a different way. So it became a little bit grueling to test this as a small team. A single level would have hundreds of commits to our source control. And I remember being proud of this game. I remember being proud of illustrating this scene. Putting this lonely god standing in a sunlit ocean and tweaking the bloom so that the light wraps around the character. And the first time I put the reflection in, I thought the game engine did a really good job with that. I remember enjoying this, but after looking at it so many times, I lost all ability to sense if this is any good or not. And this is people screenshot this. If people share the game, there's a good chance this is one of the images they share. But as the project went on, the more and more numb I felt to everything that we were making. And I was beginning to understand that I really couldn't execute a scene as beautifully as I thought I could or as I wanted to. And I was having to retread the imperfect work in order to chase seemingly endless buzz. And I was hitting my indie game emo phase really hard. Sometimes I enjoy listening to a song while I work, usually on loop, something like upbeat or ambient. But I started listening to the song by Julia Jacqueline on repeat.
Don't know how to keep loving you. Now that I know you so well, don't know how to keep loving you. Now that I know you so well, don't know how to keep loving you. Now that I know you so well, don't know how to keep loving you. Don't know how to keep loving you. Now that I know you so well, don't know how to keep loving you. Now that I know you so well, don't know how to keep loving you. Now that I know you so well, I just wanna keep loving you.
It's dramatic, I know, but we were working so hard and putting all of our money into this, and all we had to show was this sluggy, unplayable mess. I started feeling like this project might not be the successful indie darling that I thought it would be. I was having to come to terms that maybe we weren't creating something as beautiful as we had hoped. And I was having to let that go. Well, we eventually did release the game, but finishing it did not go as expected. This is our original timeline, and those dates are very optimistic. We released 22 months later. We were making a lot of progress, but struggling. And as we got closer to our release date, the rate at which we worked accelerated. At this point, we were jumping around every level, fixing a little bug here, polishing an animation, implementing a new bit of audio that Skillbart sent us. And it felt like everything was on fire. Back at the start of the project, I was really afraid to release my little indie game and have people misinterpret it or not like it. And niche communities, they can get catty, and people can be unfair. But, putting myself out there seemed really scary. But by the time we released the game, I was way too tired to care about any of that. Working 80-hour weeks for months, I felt a single-minded determination to see this through. And obviously I wanted to deliver a good product. I wanted people to have a good time. But that little insecure part of my soul that cared about what people thought or said, that was burnt out of me. We released the game in March 2021, and the marathon wasn't over. The first few days after release, each felt like a full week themselves. It was a very surreal and strange experience. Not only was it a big cathartic moment for us to release this thing we worked so hard on and for so long, but responding to the press and reading bug reports and trying to fix them and keeping up with the reviews and responding to the press and thanking people on social media and tracking reviews on Steam and everything. It was just an amount of stimulus that I've never had in my life before. And I think I sent out more emails in those few days than I had like the previous year. But luckily, I had already some of these experiences. Thank you, Kickstarter, for giving me my like bug hunting frog eye superpower, because that definitely helped. And even though the project wasn't perfect and it had a lot of bugs, I'm going to be honest, it had a lot of bugs. Critics still enjoyed it and had very nice things to say. In fact, Genesis Noir would go on to win or be nominated for a bunch of awards, and be featured in some really great Game of the Year lists. The game was more polarizing with players. The simple interactions definitely aren't for everyone, and the slow tone, definitely not for everyone. But if you are in our target audience, there's a real good chance you'll like the game. It's not perfect in any way, but a lot of people still considered it their Game of the Year. I think people recognized that we tried something different, and they appreciated that we were a small team, and they empathized with us, and they could look past the failures that we had in the project, and our stumbles. And people proved to be very generous and very patient with us, and I'm forever thankful for that. So that's how we finished Genesis Noir. 5 years of very hard work, some emotional moments, and lots of personal growth. But Genesis Noir is not done with me. I'm deeply changed by this experience, and I'm really happily still falling down the rabbit hole. Before working on Genesis Noir, I was motivated by practicing my craft and being part of a design community. We discovered new motivations, like diving deep into research and becoming independent. And now I view art making as a spiritual practice and as a quest. Genesis Noir was a little hero's journey for me. And while sitting in front of a computer screen isn't as dramatic or as exciting as a Greek myth or one of the universal stories that Joseph Campbell described, this does resonate with me, and I do think ordinary achievements can be heroic. Calvino and Blake spoke up to us, and we answered the call. We entered the unknown world of indie game development, and we found so many friends and mentors along the way. Game design really tested our abilities and shattered the delusion that we were in control of the creative process. I realized that I couldn't brute force solutions, but I had to embrace time for the work to emerge. And coming to terms with all our failures and the sheer exhaustion of working so hard, yeah, that did a number on my ego. So, and yeah, we had to atone for all the bugs. So now I'm excited to repeat these trials, as much as it can feel like a gut punch at times. And we're working on another game, which is called Nirvana Noir. So sitting in the dark, listening to Julia Jacqueline sing, "I don't know how to keep loving you now that I know you so well." Well, that was painful. That was challenging. But I did find a way to keep loving my work. And now my love to make art is deeper than I could have imagined. One thing that I didn't expect was to become the character we were authoring. Although other people figured this out way before me, common questions in interviews was, is there a character you identify with? And I'd always answer, no. I'm not in a love triangle yet. And I'm not an alcoholic noir detective yet. But I am becoming more and more like No Man. Like him, I am becoming unmoored from time and space. And I want to wrap up this presentation by honing in on what that means to me. So I've been working on Genesis Noir for more than 10 years now. So I regularly open up an old animation or old bit of code that I made when I was much younger. And there are lessons there. Old ways of building things that I rediscovered. Or ways of seeing and thinking through a creative problem that a less experienced artist had, a different perspective. And now I feel like I have a relationship with the younger Evan as a collaborator. I routinely open his work and have to redo a lot of it, or learn from it. And strange as this might seem, I feel the same way about my future selves. I feel like I receive lessons that I don't understand yet, but I will. And I have two examples. So Genesis Noir ends with a single choice. For No Man to end his affair with Miss Mass and prevent the Big Bang and the entire events of the game, or to go through with it and have the Big Bang be fired, but along the way discover humankind and for Siren Sapien to be born from this act of creation. And the very last shot is No Man holding Siren Sapien's hand, or adjusting his hat and walking away, based on the player's choice. And since illustrating these scenes, we've been working on this new game, which is inspired by 60s counterculture. So I've been diving deep into Zen. And a central concept in Zen is the paradox of simultaneously holding fast and letting go. And I didn't know of this concept when we made Genesis Noir, but in looking back on it, this scene, the conclusion of the game, seems like it's illustrating exactly this idea. And our new game imagines if both of these endings were canon, and tells both stories simultaneously, where No Man is living this dichotomous life, where he's simultaneously holding fast and letting go. And we explore a neo-noir contrasting with a film noir. And discovering these connections in old work is really so magical and meaningful to me. And maybe I'm reading into it. This is all open to interpretation. But it gets us more specific in odd ways. Like in our new game we're working on, we had an idea to do like a silly quest where you're looking for a lost cow. And it just seemed like a fun idea. We didn't put too much, brain power behind it. But as I was continuing to research Zen, I discovered this famous comic called In Search of the Missing Ox. And this portrays a man searching for his lost cow as a parable about enlightenment. And here's the 8th image in that sequence. And right there it says, no ox, no man. And that's a little weird, right? Like, what is No Man, our main character, doing there? What's so beautiful about forming a relationship with your future self is knowing that you could send gifts like this. I had no idea that coming up with a silly little cow quest idea would make me feel connected with 1,000 years of history, but it did. And just the linearity of time just seems less concrete to me these days. Like, if you haven't heard of time crystals, Google time crystals. Scientists have somehow created these endlessly oscillating 4-dimensional crystals, and that's apparently what they look like. And I have no idea what any of that means, but it makes me think about the paradoxical relationship between the creator and the creation, this idea of self-causation. And I wonder, how can the artist be influenced by their art, and their art be influenced by the art? It seems like this, after working on the game for so long, I'm not sure if I made the game or if the game has made me. And I'm so motivated to explore this mystery and its companion, how to be and become the universe. I think this image of Newton by Blake captures this mystery. Blake is criticizing Newton's clockwork universe by portraying him so focused on his work that he ignores the beauty of nature. But this posture and this isolation is how I imagine William Blake working. Making prints today isn't easy, let alone with the technology from hundreds of years ago. Blake had to hand ink each plate so gently. And this is such a time-consuming, laborious process, which makes Blake's spiritual vision such a mystery. How could he write something as beautiful as to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour? How could he write something that beautiful by spending all of his time in his dingy studio? The mystery of how dedication to our craft can connect us with the universe is very motivating to me. Even working hard on this presentation has been rewarding in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The first time I gave this speech and professed my love for William Blake was at the MUFO conference in Prague. And on my way back to New York, I visited our musicians in London. And look who we stumbled on. Yeah, there's Blake's Newton. And we had no idea turning the corner we would see that. But it was very deeply meaningful to me. And I find that the more dedicated I become to my craft, the more I'm rewarded. I fall in this virtuous feedback loop where I discover connections in the world, which encourages me to become more sensitive and more dedicated. And that empowers me to discover even more connections. And each year that I continue to design, animate, code, and craft, I find more joy and more ways to love art making. I believe there's an endless well of motivation to discover. Whether you're creating an indie game or designing for a client or any other job, your work can be an end in itself. And speaking to students today, there's, I think, a big likelihood that the industry is going through changes in unpredictable ways. AI might change our tools or even our relationship with work. But I don't think you need to fear any change if you cultivate your resilience and your sensitivity to beauty and the divine. Through experiencing the physical world, embracing time, and connecting with the community, you're going to have enormous value and, make some cool things. So thank you so much for listening to me ramble about all this.
We have some time for some questions.
Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned how Genesis Noir sort of came out of just your collaboration with Jeremy and taking time to explore personal projects. How did you go about balancing, having a job and doing all of that, and also finding time to be creative and truly explore what you enjoyed or doing?
Well, at that time, Jeremy and I were both freelancers. So in our free time, we definitely liked being creative outside of our professional capacity. But we would definitely take time and be deliberate to take time off between our commercial jobs. So that's definitely one of the advantages of being a freelancer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk to what the cultural significance and function of gaming is and what you want it to be?
Yeah. Well, I think there's so many different kinds of games and kinds of interaction. I view this not so much as a game, but more as interactive fiction, because there's no mastery in this game. It's all about participating in a story. So I think there's those two buckets. I think both have enormous value. I do think the cycle of mastering a skill and getting better and exploring systems is tremendously valuable. It builds resilience, and games can be addictive, and that is something that as designers we need to be very conscious about and not be predatory. And then I also think in an interactive space, games that don't emphasize mastery like this game, I think they do add a tremendous value even if the interaction is simple as you mousing over something or clicking on it, it doesn't have to be a big challenge, but making the player the one who touches something, or you control the pacing because you're not passively watching something. You get to sit and read something or return to something. I think those are real strengths of games as a medium, and there's definitely, obviously, enormous value in a director or an author really having a tightly controlled experience, but I think some experiences definitely benefit from letting the player engage with it on their own terms.
Was Genesis Noir built in its own engine?
We used Unreal Engine.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, originally we started in Unity. At that time, there were some issues importing animation, and also the advantage of Unreal is that you get to modify the game engine without having to license the thing. So for Genesis Noir, Jeremy actually modified the render pipeline, so that there are some custom passes that let us do some of the seeing things through other things effect, which in hindsight we probably didn't need to do, and that was an enormous amount of work. But yeah, we used it.
What motivates you to step into fields that you feel a little bit out of depth in? Like if you're creating something for the first time, or you're trying something with a new skill set?
Yeah.
What would you say is a good source of motivation or inspiration to get into that point when you're trying to test new things as an artist?
Yeah, well, I think it takes two things. It takes one, faith. You have to believe in the process because you're going to be making things that are broken and aren't beautiful, and you have to accept that it's not going to be what you intended. It's going to turn out differently, and have faith that it'll get there. And then secondly, you need community. You need iteration, you need feedback, and you need guidance. So anytime you do something new, I'm a huge believer in people specializing and perfecting, and having doing something very well. I'm also a very big believer in generalists. I view myself as a generalist, and there's a path for that. But yeah, it just requires you to accept feedback and be flexible. Let it go where it wants to go.
There are a lot of really cool interaction in your game, and I wonder what's their inspiration, design process in coming up with those interactions.
Yeah, mostly just things that we wanted to do, or either things we wanted to do, or oh God, we're way in over our head and we have to simplify. Those are the two motivations. And we're definitely very inspired by a lot of other interactions and games. Jeremy and my background were web interactive or installation art, so a lot of our interactions kind of come from that world more so than gaming. But there are some games that do these kinds of exploratory tactile interactions. One of my favorites is Windowsill by Vector Park, which I highly recommend.
Are there any game systems that you ended up including only because it felt like you put a lot of time into it, but hindsight you would have scrapped completely?
Yeah, I think so. Small team, we really struggled with releasing on Nintendo Switch, Xbox, PC, and Mac. We definitely underestimated the challenge of just testing everything on all those platforms and supporting them all. So yeah, in our second game, we're just working towards Xbox and PC at release, and hopefully we'll bring it to other systems later. But yeah, that's a huge challenge, and one of the things I miss most about animation or static work is it doesn't have to run on every computer, and there's so many mysteries about why something breaks. So yeah, hugely humbling to make a game and have it break all the time.
When it comes to you're finding inspiration for a lot of the work that you do, do you have any sort of methods in which you just go about thinking on whether or not this inspiration applies to your current idea?
That's interesting. I tend to just throw everything in a big bucket, and because our timeline is so long that when our first conception of a scene or an interaction is very loose, and then we work on everything else and we kind of gesture in the rest of the experience. We return to that and we've either learned new things, we've developed new tools, we've found new inspirations, and the interaction or scene develops. So just through time and through iteration, that's one advantage of these kind of long-form game projects is you don't have to get it right at the first go. Thank you.
You mentioned that the game kind of emerged from a lot of different scattered ideas and past experiences. Do you have like a way to organize all those like scattered ideas and then you kind of extract them when you need to?
Yeah, probably not the best. Like, I pretty much just throw everything in a folder. I keep notes like from things I read on Google Keep. As a team, we use Discord, so we have like all our scenes broken out into different channels or threads or whatever, and we'll just throw stuff in there. I think at some point for this kind of scale project, it's really hard to organize everything. Like just maintenance of a project becomes a full-time job. So yeah, for this kind of project, I think it's immersion, and acceptance that some things, some ideas will be forgotten, some maybe perfect solutions will be forgotten, and it just accepts that, yeah, some things are going to get lost.
Mm-hmm. Firstly, it was amazing. The game looks beautiful, and like the story as well was told like in all your animations. And I thought it's hilarious that it starts from a Google Doc, because that feels like very linear compared to the amount of work you're doing. Like, how did that storytelling process, how do you develop it? Is it like that stream of a Google Doc, and what is it like mixing things around? Because I think that's something we could all apply to our work.
Yeah, well, so my background with Jeremy is from advertising, and specifically we learned a lot about our process from being at Google Creative Lab. And what they do there is it's all about pitch documents, like slideshows. So that's how we work, is we create thumbnail storyboards, we put them in a deck, we throw in inspiration, and it's we take things out, we move things around. We try to keep it up to date, but also at some point it just becomes antiquated. So yeah, the organizational part is really challenging, and I think that just requires us to be dedicated and to communicate with one another a lot, and think through things with drawing, with prototypes, with storyboards, or audio. Our ambition is for every different aspect to holistically drive the overall product.
The talk was amazing. Thank you so much. And I had a question about the characters that you designed and how it got mentioned that you look like them, like him. And also I wanted to relate that to the self-actualization of that you said, the art creates the artist and the artist creates the art. So from my understanding is that you didn't really see yourself in the character until someone pointed it out. So after it was pointed out, did you start kind of living in his place, kind of imagining that you were in his place, or did you kind of see him as another persona of yourself?
Not quite. I think basically I'm connecting with the universal archetypes, and I think that's what the big lesson for myself through this whole process is that archetypes are real. And I went into this project being why does everyone give what's with the starving artist stereotype? That can't be real. And they're no, actually, I've experienced it, and seeing why there are bigger things that when you pursue these kinds of stories or challenges, whether it's making an indie game or starting a business or any kind of big challenging thing, I think there are these kind of similar paths that you find yourself on, and that's the beauty of art making and design, is finding ways for us to as humans all kind of be yeah, I went through that too, and I can connect with anyone now. So I think that's you know, the ambition of being an artist.
You emphasize receiving feedback. Is there ever a point where you feel like you receive too much feedback, or is this something
Yeah, that's a really challenging part because yeah, you'll show your game or your design or anything to multiple people who have different, you know, priorities or different language to describe what the, you know, what they find could be improved about your work, and trying to interpret that's a skill in itself. For us, really, we were just so overwhelmed by the project that we could be very selective about the feedback. So there's like, even internally, there's so many things that we wanted to do that we never, you know, got a chance to do, or we never will. And I think making those compromises is a part of trying to finish something in the world. So yeah, mostly it's like a gut feeling. Obviously there's some like, if you hear something, a piece of feedback 10 times, then yeah, you should definitely do that. But often it's not quite that clear. Often it's like, I think there's a general problem here, and I think it could be solved in this dimension or in this dimension, and like you can't really do both just for scope. So yeah, it's tough.
How about one more question? Time for one more? Somebody's got to ask a question now. It'll be anticlimactic. Go ahead. Oh, will you? Amber, you do the last. You do the last word.
Well, I was interested in how you're feeling about your second game. Like, are you scared because of kind of all of the feedback, all the amazing feedback that you received for your first game? Like, how is like the relationship between you and like your collaborators like streamlined? Like, what do you anticipate everything is going to pan out to be, or is it going to be just as unpredictable, do you think?
I think unpredictable for sure. We were definitely hoping that we knew what we were doing, and no, we still don't. There's still so much to learn. For our new game, Genesis Noir is like a series of levels, self-contained levels, and our new game is like a consistent city, like a cosmic city, metaphysical metropolis that you explore, and changing out like that city changes as the story progresses. Like we change the set dressing, or there's a new scene here, and that's like a more familiar game kind of structure. But we found like we really underestimated how challenging it would be to create something that like wasn't fancy motion graphics transitions. So yeah, I think no matter what, we want to challenge ourselves, and we're always going to underestimate what's involved. So yeah, we'll see where the project ends up, and it's a different experience, but we're trying to have a more concrete plot, like a much more detailed and intricate plot. And this was like a tone piece. The little love triangle is not a complicated story. So that's a huge challenge for ourselves as well. So yeah, we'll see how that turns out.
Great, thanks again.